That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
I have a dream today. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to episode 14 of the Only Human podcast. Good to be into 2024. It's going to be a great year, even though there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. I'm Tony Kern. I'll be your host again today, where we're going to talk about rebels and rogues. I thought this might be appropriate for the week when a lot of us make New Year's resolutions. I make a lot of them. I have for a long time, and I have a file of them. They don't all, I guess my resolve is not always good enough to follow through on 100% of them, but I've made some significant changes thinking about the turning of the calendar from one year to the next. So we all want to think about becoming something slightly different, or doing something maybe even significantly different from who we are today. Hey, this podcast loves New Year's resolutions, or any commitment to change for the better, right? It's why we're here. But we also want to make sure that we do it with our eyes wide open. Change is the mother of risk, even good change, which leads us to our Blue Threat Proverb of the week. I always have trouble saying that. Our Blue Threat Proverb of the week: beware the guru. And while it doesn't precisely fit the topic of the day, it fits well enough. And here's why. We tend to look up to people that are charismatic. We tend to look up to people that we perceive are extremely knowledgeable. And today, as we talk about rebels and rogues, we're going to find that both are charismatic characters that attract a following, right? So we have to be careful that when we select somebody to admire, our heroes, maybe even our anti-heroes, that we select them carefully. We're going to get right back to that right after a word from our sponsor.
The COVID pandemic and its aftermath exposed numerous gaps in everything from supply lines to healthcare. On the personal level, we've all felt it in an overall decline in mental health and well-being, whether in ourselves, our loved ones, or friends and coworkers. No one has been spared, but some have bounced back much faster than others. Why are some people better able to bear their accumulating burdens and daily stresses? It's because they've transformed their life experiences into psychological strength. The good news is that you can do this too. Just like physical muscles, we can develop our mental resilience, toughness, and agility if we know how. Welcome to the gym. Armored Knight Psychological Strength Building is a program that will show you how to begin building those mental muscles, armoring you to better deflect the constant barrage of mental arrows that wear you down. Join us on our website at convergentperformance.com and click the link for e-learning to sign up for this exciting program today.
So let's get started and talk about rebels and rogues. A rebel is someone who wants to change the system, whatever that system may be. They see an injustice or a better way of doing things, and they've decided that they're willing to lead the fight for or against whatever this is. A rogue looks and seems a lot like a rebel, but there's one key difference. A rogue doesn't care about the system. A rogue doesn't care about you. All they care about is themselves. Our world needs rebels, but we don't need rogues. So today we're going to look at the difference between these two similar sounding and similar looking characters, reflecting back to the Blue Threat Proverb of the week: beware the guru. So far in 2023, last year, this podcast has focused on how we can close the gap between who we are today and who we're capable of becoming tomorrow or in the future. But there's another side of this, a darker side, where we need to stop ourselves from becoming something we never sought to become, but we might be heading towards if we don't change. So I want to begin this discussion with a true story. It's actually the one that began my writing and research career, even before I wrote Redefining Airmanship or Flight Discipline or any of the books. It's a story of a good man whom I once knew, who for some reason I don't understand and maybe will never understand till I meet Bud in that happy hour in the sky and I can talk to him. This guy got on the wrong track and he couldn't get off. His name was Bud Holland, actually Arthur Holland, but everybody called him Bud. And this is the sad story of Czar 5-2. Call sign for the B-52, he crashed on the 24th of June, 1994. It was all over the news for a while. It showed a B-52 in over 90 degrees of bank crashing into the ground when one of the crew members actually tried to eject. And it was the end of a sad story of rogue behavior. But let's go back to the beginning. I first met Bud when we were both crew members in what was called a numbered Air Force standardization team. Now, back when I was a young first lieutenant, I got hit in the head with a Nerf missile by my boss, and he said, "Hey, we need somebody to serve on this team from our base. That's going to be a team from people from multiple bases, and you're going to meet. And you're going to talk about, the policies and procedures and standardization guidelines and all of those things, and you're going to bring that feedback to the numbered Air Force commander, and it'll help him make decisions in the future." Yes, sir. Got it. So I met a couple of different times. This was in the relatively early 1980s with this group of people from different bases, and that's where I met then young Captain Bud Holland. He was an impressive guy. He looked the part, tall, handsome, by the book, very knowledgeable. So knowledgeable that when people were saying, "Let's look this up in the manual," Bud would say, "It's on page 127, chapter 3, paragraph 6. This guy knew the books. He knew the aircraft systems. By all indications, he was on the fast track. So fast forward, I lost track of Bud for a decade until I saw his name in the mishap report. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. I absolutely could not believe some of the behaviors that were indicated that this guy that I had once known to be a by-the-book guy could have been true. And so I didn't think they were. I decided to do a little investigating myself. By this time, it was 1995, and I was at an inter-service school up at Fort Leavenworth Army Command and General Staff College. And they let me take a week to look a little bit deeper into this. And so I pulled every document I could. I picked up the phone. I talked to a bunch of people. And what I discovered was unbelievable. I ended up writing a case study called Darker Shades of Blue about this great aviator's fall from glory. That case study is still out there. It's now been translated into 18 different languages and taught around the world in leadership classes. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Here's the story. After I lost track of Bud, he went on to get promoted and get promoted again. He was a lieutenant colonel. He was stationed at Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane, Washington. Bud had climbed the ladder not only in rank, but he was the director of standardization and evaluation. Now that's important because that's the person at any given base or any given bomb wing that gives check rides and sets the standards for the rest of the wing. He's the one that makes sure that the standards are being met. And so how could this guy not only have crashed this airplane in 90 degrees of bank that was caught on video and shown on the news over and over and over again, but how could this investigation reveal that he had 3 or 4 years of history of doing the most insane types of flying you'd ever seen? How could Bud Holland, this squared away guy, have become a rogue? And so I started my case study with a quote because I was talking to a few people about, what they knew about Bud and how true this report was and all of that. And one of the gentlemen told me a story that he was walking up to Wing headquarters for a meeting, and there was a car parked right in front of the Wing headquarters, clearly right center in a no parking zone. And so this young captain was walking with another young officer, and one of the officers looked at the other one and said, whose car is that? And he said, well, that's Bud's car. He parks there all the time. Well, how's he get away with that? And this one line tells the story of what a rogue truly is. And the captain responded to the younger officer, I don't know. He just does. How does he get away with that? I don't know. He just does. So one of the key indicators of a rogue is they begin to flaunt the rules. And they do so openly. And they're proud of it, right? It's not a one-time thing. It's an all-the-time thing. So let's look at a few of the developing behaviors and what led to this case study, which, by the way, this is the first time I've talked about this in probably a decade. I no longer teach this case study, and I'll tell you why here in a few minutes. But let's go back and review Bud Holland's documented behavior. So the mishap board that wrote the investigation stated that Lieutenant Colonel Holland's macho daredevil personality, and I'm reading this quote, macho daredevil personality significantly influenced the crash sequence. He said USAF Air Force personnel testified that Holland had developed a reputation as an aggressive pilot who broke flight safety and other rules. And this rule breaking involved a lot of things: flying well below minimum altitudes, exceeding bank angles, climb rates, all kinds of things. Now, keep in mind a B-52 is a 50-year-old airplane at the time, huge wingspan. It's not a fighter. It's meant to be flown cautiously. So the first incident occurred in 1991, and the B-52 was piloted by Holland, and he decided he was going to do a flyover of his daughter's softball game. So he started out at about 2,000 feet, and he spiraled down and flew over and over and over again at increasingly lower altitudes, to the point where the parents screamed and the coaches pulled the players off the field. The maneuver was described by one of the people there at the softball game as a death spiral, as the nose continued to drop. After he got down well below 500 feet or so, he regained control of the aircraft and flew away. Well, he always probably had control of the aircraft, but he stopped scaring people. Game went on. Nothing happened as a result of this. In fact, a few months later, he was selected to fly the air show at Fairchild. And he did some crazy things. Overbanking, 60 degrees nose high in this aircraft that was not meant to do that. And then he'd go up and fly what's called a wing over, where you just go to 90 degrees of bank and it brings the nose down, and very cool to look at, I guess, but also very illegal. And as a result of that, you would think there'd be some sort of discipline, but there was none. So a couple months later, he was asked to do a flyover for a change of command, where a new commander's coming in. It's kind of a formal ceremony. And he flew over the change command, not only during practice, but actually during the change command, at well underneath 100 feet. So low that it blew the hats off of the people that were standing there, some of them diving for cover. So you would think, my gosh, every commander in the unit and some from outside the unit are right there. Something's bound to happen now. Nothing. Zip. Nada. Who was this guy? Who was this guy? So following year in May, they have their next air show. Same thing. He comes in, he's doing, first of all, how does he get selected to do the air shows? Clearly, some people out there think it's cool. Some people out there in positions of authority selected him to do it. Why? We'll come back to the whys here in a few minutes. So we're not done yet, right? Fast forward to April 1993, and Lieutenant Colonel Holland is with his crew, and they're flying out of Guam, right? And they're dropping some bombs out in the middle of the water on some targets, and they're inert bombs. But he ordered his navigator to crawl back into the bomb bay with a video camera and videotape the bombs that were falling from the aircraft. Highly illegal, highly dangerous. Right? And the navigator was so upset about it, he brought the video back to show his commanders. And here's another classic example of what rogues can get away with. Here's video evidence. Before, it's kind of like eyeball evidence and hearsay evidence, but this guy came back and said, hey, he made me do this, and here's the video. And the deputy commander for operations there, a full colonel, says, hey, okay, I don't want to know anything about the video. I don't care. Why? Why is this person who's in charge of standardization for the entire unit being allowed to flaunt the rules? Fast forward 1993 August, they're practicing for an air show. Once again, he's going almost 80 degrees nose high, almost vertical. He's flying well below approved altitudes, over banking. They've got a new commander there. The commanders talk about, man, this is crazy. We got to do something about it. But neither one of them does. Right? It gets crazier. And I know it's hard to believe. Just a couple of months later, Colonel Holland contacts a local photographer and says, hey, be on this hill out at the Yakima bomb range, a place where they go and practice their bomb runs, and you're going to get some great photographs. So he's flying over this bomb range so low that the photographer actually has to drop his camera and fall off the hill and roll, because he said the aircraft was going to hit him. And this guy's only like 5'10" tall. So that can't possibly be true, right? That can't possibly be true. The minimum altitude there is 400 or 500 feet that they're allowed to fly. When they pulled the tapes off the aircraft and they looked at it, he crossed one ridge line at 30 feet. And on that particular spot where the photographer was, he was 3 feet off the ground. 3 feet off the ground, flying hundreds of miles an hour in an aircraft that's a couple hundred feet wide. The co-pilot there grabbed the controls. This was in the testimony of the follow-on accident investigation, and said, climb, climb, climb. Bud Holland turned and laughed at him and said, if you can't fly with me if you're going to be a little pussy. And yet, they continued to allow him to fly. And furthermore, they selected him to fly what would become the final B-52 demonstration at an air show, because they're closing the bomb wing at the base. So after all of these things, documented evidence, people coming in saying, I don't want to fly with this guy anymore. Right? They select him to fly the air show again, but they can't find any crew members to fly with him. So another officer in the wing that was the squadron commander of the unit where the pilots were coming in saying, even if I got it reminded me of Top Gun. Sorry, I've lost it. I'm not flying with this guy anymore. He said, okay, none of you will have to fly with him anymore. I will. And so it was Lieutenant Colonel Mark McGeehan who was in the other seat during the crash. Considerable animosity between these two guys as they're prepping for this air show, right? And we're coming to the end of the Bud Holland story here. I don't mean to dominate the podcast with just one story. But what happened here is they're practicing for the air show. The aircraft comes in after doing all this crazy stuff, well out of regulations. All the bosses are watching. Nobody's doing anything. And they're coming into land, and they get sent around for one more circle because there was an aircraft on the runway. And that's when the video sequence picks up of an extremely high bank angle. Aircraft noses over and crashes into the ground. Interestingly, in the investigation, they missed the nuclear weapons storage facility just by a couple of 100 yards. And then many people inside the squadron said, yeah, Bud was the best pilot ever. It couldn't have been him flying. In fact, he probably took the controls from that hack in the other seat just in time to miss the weapons storage area. Wow. So let's get into rogues here for a second. I told this story a lot in the first decade after I wrote it, but then I stopped, and here's why I stopped. I stopped because Bud Holland was so far out there that people were saying, I might violate a rule every now and again, but I'm not that far gone yet, so I'm okay. He was such an outlier, such a rogue, that it began to redefine what poor discipline meant for everybody else. So I quit talking about this, but I never quit wondering why good people went bad and got on these tracks to craziness, man. This is crazy town. And what I found as I began to study rogues is they're not just pilots, right? I've studied dozens of cases of rogues, clergy, lawyers, businessmen, school superintendents, doctors, law enforcement. They cross into all these, and of course politicians, that almost goes with the territory, right? But they all shared a few common traits. And I want to share those with you right now. The scientific name for this might be what they call a maladaptive sociopath. Right? Sociopath care about themselves, and they have allowed this sociopathy, this weird mindset, to influence their behaviors and also influence the behaviors of others. So let's look at the differences between rebels who are out to change a system and make things better and rogues who definitely are not. I've got 10 characteristics to help you identify whether you might be on a track to becoming a rogue or whether someone you know is. And I want to run through these, but the first 3 apply to high performers as well. And that's part of the mask that a rogue wears. A rogue is recognized by many people as extremely high performing. So, characteristic number 1 is rogues and rebels are highly skilled and often highly placed. Number 2, they're very charismatic. They attract people to them. Number 3, they have great people skills. Nothing wrong with those 3 things, right? Highly skilled, highly placed, charismatic, great people skills. We want that in our leaders. We need that in our leaders. Now it begins to differentiate between good leaders that are highly skilled, highly placed, charismatic, and great people skills, and true rogues. Number 4, rogues force people to take sides. Nobody is neutral. I will tell you, over the years, I've interviewed or spoken with 30 or 40 people that were at Fairchild Air Force Base when Bud Holland was doing all this stuff. And not one of them said, Bud Holland, who's that? I could take him or leave him. I never really got much involved. Everybody, from the shopkeepers downtown to the wives in the officers' wives club, who would look at the schedule, and if Bud was going to be in the pattern, they'd take their kids and drive off base. Right? Nobody's neutral. But there are a lot of groupies that say this is cool. This is a guy who's really setting it out there. And one of the things that Bud did was he kind of flipped the script. He said, you may think this is undisciplined, but I'm training these young people for war. And all these peacetime regulations don't matter. So it's you that's really putting them in danger. It's not me doing things that the rules don't allow. Because in war, we're going to have to do all these things. Nobody actually called him out on that. They just let it go. So number 4 was rogues force people to take sides. Nobody's neutral about a rogue. Number 5, rogues are liars. When Bud would be interviewed on some of these things because they did talk to him about it. They just didn't document it. His leaders, he would flat out lie that, well, this had been approved by this person who is no longer there, and I just assumed that this was true now. When they went back and interviewed previous commanders, they said, we never had that conversation. Number 6 flows from number 5. Rogues are extremely manipulative. They know who their enemies are and they go after them. Right? Character assassination, ridicule. Think back into the cockpit where he called the co-pilot a weak little girl or whatever. So they will manipulate, character assassinate their enemies, build up their groupies so that they're forming a group around them of like-minded people. Number 7, extremely important. Rogues have progressively worse behaviors. It always ends badly for a rogue. One example was a school superintendent in Texas who literally started out by ridiculing people in the school board meetings and ended up driving a bulldozer and crashing through a wall and destroying something, property that was in the way of her doing one of the things she wanted to do with that land. She goes, oh, there's nothing you can do about it now. What you were trying to protect is gone. Right? And she got away with it. It's crazy. Right? Rogues have progressively worse behaviors. It always starts with some small thing, and it always ends with death, jail time, or hospitalization. And here's the other thing. There's a lot of collateral damage. It's not just them. There were 3 other men that died with Bud Holland. As you look at some of the clergy, some of the doctors, some of the lawyers that have exuded these behaviors, they always take people with them. Right? Number 8, and I've kind of said this before, but for a rogue, it's never about you. It's always about me, the rogue. It's always about their reputation, their influence, their fame. I'm not sure what a true rogue seeks. It's seldom money, but sometimes money is associated with it. I think it's the fanboy syndrome. They want and need people to worship at the altar of their behaviors. They need fans. Number 9, they have no remorse for their actions. Even when confronted with video evidence, and in some of the discussions that leaders tried to have with these rogues, they will have a reason why they did it, an excuse why they did it. They'll lie about what actually happened, but it's never taken into account that, okay, yes, maybe I was wrong and I need to change a little bit here. Those discussions, those words never come out of a rogue's mouth. No remorse for their actions. And finally, number 10, a rogue will not stop their behavior unless you make them stop. We could talk a little bit about how you do that, but what I'd rather do at this point is give you some hints. What do you do if you actually encounter one of these people? Now, they're still out there, for sure. Some of them are wearing suits. Some of them are wearing pilots' outfits, doctors' uniforms, etc. But if you encounter one, there's some really key things that you need to do to keep yourself out of harm's way. Number 1 is do not buy in to what they're selling. They are hugely charismatic. They're great communicators, and it's very easy to get sucked into their world. You've got to force yourself, I'm not buying into this. Number 2, document everything you see and communicate your concern in writing to your leaders. When a rogue finally crashes, be that literally or metaphorically, they leave a pretty good frag pattern around them. There's a lot of people that are going to get damaged in the aftermath. So protect yourself by documenting everything and communicating what you see in writing to those in leadership positions that have responsibility and authority to counteract this rogue behavior. The third thing you need to do is stay away, stay far away. The more that you get close to a rogue, the more likely they're going to influence you. And remember, it's just as advantageous for them in some cases to have folks that hate what they do, because they can use that to further polarize and consolidate their groupies. So just stay away, as far away as you can. Number 4, warn your peers. You're going to have, while you may not be able to have an active discussion with the rogue, him or herself. By the way, I used to think they were only men, but as you look now and over the past years, probably a third of the rogues I've encountered in the case studies I've developed are women. So warn your peers. And if they happen to be inside the groupie pro-rogue regime, those are people you may be able to talk some sense into, right? Because they will definitely be in the frag pattern when the rogue crashes. And the last thing you can do if you encounter a rogue is don't engage in discussions or arguments with them. They're more likely to turn you than you are to change them. Right? They're not going to change their behavior based on your opinion as a peer and sometimes even as a leader. So when you engage in that discussion, you're boxing outside your weight class. These guys are master manipulators, liars. And their charisma can very easily have you walking away going, yeah, Bud makes a lot of sense. He is training for war. And I guess maybe these rules don't apply all the time, everywhere, to everyone. And he's certainly extremely skilled. So maybe it's good, right? That's the kind of mindset that pulled people to him. So back to rebels, real quickly. Rebels will also be charismatic and great communicators and have a cause, but rebels will always have a cause outside of themselves, right? And so we want to cheer on the rebels, right? As we go into 2024, gosh, with the world the way it is, we need more rebels. We need people to change things for the better. But always look for those last 4 things or 6 things in there. Always look for forcing people to take sides, lying, manipulation, progressively worse behaviors, no remorse. Right? Look for those things to be able to distinguish the true rebel, which we need, from the rogue, which we don't. So a couple of takeaways here as we wrap up episode 14, first one of 2024. Number 1, recognize the dangers. Rogues exist out there. Know what to look for, know how to identify them, and know what to do when you do identify them. And more importantly, know what not to do. Number 2, keep your distance. And number 3, perhaps the most important, I think we all secretly maybe harbor a few rogue ambitions of our own. We'd all like to be famous. We'd all like to be respected. We'd all probably like to have a group of people that thought we were brilliant and fantastic and the best in the world and following in our wake, right? But you have to have a purpose beyond yourself. If the purpose becomes just getting that group and getting that adoration, then you're on that track that leads to the very dark place. I don't know what it was that took that knowledgeable, high-achieving, by-the-book young officer named Bud Holland to crazy town. But there was something. There was a first event, a frustration, a joy of experiencing adoration, that first groupie, something. Right? So when we have a purpose that goes beyond ourselves, we're able to recognize when we become a little more narcissistic. And that's probably the most important takeaway on this episode about rebels and rogues. Well, that's a wrap on episode 14. And as we bring this to a close, I want you to think about what we've talked about today. It's important to push back against things that aren't working as well as they could, or things that are wrong, right? But it's not appropriate for us to do that in self-seeking behaviors. As you think about your New Year's resolutions, make a few intentional decisions about how you want to live your life. And as always, how you can get better in all the ways that matter to you. And keep the feedback coming this year. We are really getting some traction here with the Only Human podcast. Share it as widely as you can with as many people as you can. Not because I want more fans, but because I think what we're talking about is important. So please share it with your peers, your friends, your family, and keep the feedback coming, because after all, I too am only human. See you soon.